Hello, I'm Younghae Kim from Hanmaum Church in Chuncheon. After being born again, I give thanks to the Lord for giving me this opportunity to boast about my greatest weakness. I believe that my weakness is the strength of the Lord.
Amen.
I have achondrogenesis, the dwarfism disorder. I am 138 centimeters tall, and when I was in middle school, I stopped growing taller and I only grew sideways to become what you see now. I am the fourth of 5 children, born to a family of farmers in the countryside. My mother is normal, but my father has the same disability as mine. Due to this hereditary condition, my sister and I are abnormally short, while my brothers are tall. I blame my parents for my being this way. Due to my abnormal height, I was afraid of meeting new people and facing unfamiliar things or a new environment. When I was in middle school, a military base was being built in my hometown, so we all had to move away. My friends were so precious to me, but I had to say goodbye to them, and I felt so alone. I transferred to a new school when I was in 8th grade with the fear of facing a new place and new people. After I transferred to a new school, I sat by myself at the playground and cried because I felt so alone. As a person with a disability, I was made fun of all the time. It would have been nice to be called handicapped or disabled. I have bow legs and I walked in a funny way, so when I was a child, other kids would call me a retard. I feared young children the most because they're so honest that they ask very frank questions. Mom, why is she so short? Why is she only as tall as me? They would loudly whisper things like that. Also, some kids would imitate the way I walked with my bow legs, and they would call me a midget. So I hated myself, and I even envied people who were in wheelchairs. I wished that I was in a wheelchair so that I could hide my legs. Because I didn't want people to see my body, I avoided going to public saunas. I didn't wear shorts even during very hot summers. But I did have a fantasy about marrying a Prince Charming who rode in on a white horse. I thought the prince would always be with me and that he'd satisfy what I lacked due to my disability. When I got a job and became financially stable, I had a chance to go on a blind date. While I had a physical disability, my blind date was tall and good looking. But as we talked, the conversation didn't feel right. I felt like I was talking to a wall. I think he had some kind of a mental disability. I was so discouraged, I felt my heart sink. I cried and cried as I sat in the bus on the way home, and I thought, am I worth anything with this disability? Dejection was all I could feel. I realized that it was really hard for a disabled person like me to find someone to marry. I was so discouraged by my condition. I hated it so much, and I hated myself. I blamed God for making me this way. The truth was, I ignored my condition as much as I could. That was because, due to my family's financial difficulties, I couldn't even think about having surgery to lengthen or strengthen my legs. But after I got a job, when I went to get a physical checkup, normally it would be a quick checkup. But the doctor recommended that I meet a specialist. I got very interested and I became hopeful. I was in my 20s back then. The specialist said, "Was it hard living with legs like yours?" So I answered, "No, it wasn't too bad." Then he said, "Then just keep living this way. Don't bother getting surgery." What he said was enough to completely shatter any hope I had about fixing my legs. I felt it was something that I had to live with, so I no longer wanted to think too much about it. So I buried the issue of my disability deep in my heart, and I tried to experience a lot of things, travel often, and gain a lot of knowledge to make up for my weakness. I began receiving recognition from people and even passed the civil service exam. Then I grew fairly satisfied. However, because my disability still grieved my heart, the heartache, inferiority complex, low self-esteem, and social anxiety did not go away. Then I came to meet the risen Lord Jesus. I had gone to church with my older sister every Sunday since I was 9 years old. I did my best to live a Christian life, attending church on Sundays, giving tithes, and serving. However, my struggle with my disability remained, and when I started working, I began to compromise with the world. Then everything fell apart. After getting my first job, I wanted to be accepted by my boss. So I began drinking when we went out with people from work, and I got along well with them. That was because I was afraid of losing relationships with my coworkers and of being alone and isolated. When I began to lose the family and friends I relied on, I felt scared because I felt alone. When I walked to work in the morning, sometimes my legs would hurt, but I couldn't let myself take a break. If I did, I thought people would stare at me because I looked weird. I wished that someone was with me, but God was invisible. So friends who were physically beside me felt more reassuring and encouraging. However, my friends couldn't be with me all the time. So then, I thought that God, though invisible and abstract, could always stay with me. However, I couldn't be sure whether he really existed or not. So in my heart, I would cry out, God, I know you're invisible, but you're there for sure, right? You have to be. About that time, I visited Hanmaum Church because a friend urged me to. There I realized that, though I said I believed in Jesus, my faith was really based on a vague conviction. And at last, I found the proof that I was looking for, which confirmed the existence of God. You see, in Luke chapter 24, the disciples thought that the risen Jesus was a ghost and were doubting and afraid. But Jesus told them to touch his hands and feet. He even ate fish with them. That was where I clearly saw Jesus' risen body. He had a body that passed through a closed door, yet you could touch his flesh and bone. It was a changed, holy body. It could eat food. It would never rot away. It was eternal. God had sent his only Son in the form of a man to this world. Though he had already revealed through the resurrection that he is my Lord and God, I was still living as my own Lord, which was a terrible sin. Although Jesus is God and the Creator who made me, I had complained about myself and lived with an inferiority complex because I had been my own Lord. I repented my sin of being my own Lord and not believing in Jesus, and I received him as my Lord into my heart. When I met the risen Lord, my life completely changed. Until this point, when I looked at myself, I could not love myself. So I would read chapter 1 of Genesis many times, trying to find out who I was. God created man, and he said that he was very pleased. However, when I looked at myself, I wasn't pleased at all. It was because I was seeing things from my perspective. But when I saw myself from God's perspective, I realized that human beings were created to meet God's standard. So then, because God the Creator was the owner of my body, I was set free from whatever I looked like. Now I can go to public saunas without worrying about what people think, and I can also freely swim in swimming pools. Now I can wear shorts during the summer as well. I began to love myself just as I was. Although I have a disability, I became thankful because God has created me and I am precious. Now, it doesn't matter if people call me a short midget. I am not affected by what people say anymore, and I only respond to the words of the risen Jesus. It's because only the words of the risen Lord are what is real. And I stopped blaming my parents. I stopped blaming my father for drinking and my parents for giving me a disabled body. And I began to respect my parents. Although I live far away from them due to my job, I have been praying that God would give me the chance to move closer to them so that I can serve them. It doesn't matter whether I have a physical limitation or not. So what if I'm not physically perfect? It doesn't matter what people say. Victory is not of this world. Rather, it is determined in the eternal kingdom of heaven. God exists and He is always with me inside my heart. So I no longer fear being alone or get self-conscious, and I'm full of confidence regardless of whatever circumstance. Also, I had needed someone because I was having a hard time and ashamed of myself. But now I have the full support of church members and the church body that was built up through the gospel. In the past, I was busy taking care of only myself since I was the person with a disability. However, chapter 9 of John tells a story of a man who was born blind. When the disciples asked Jesus about whose sin caused him to be born blind, Jesus explained that he was born blind so that God would show His work through him. This message became words of great comfort and hope to me. I was overjoyed to find out that, although I was disabled, I was now living for the glory of God. I was full of joy when I met the risen Lord, and so I naturally began to share the gospel with my coworkers. First, I shared the gospel with a colleague in my office. She had been struggling with family problems and issues with her children, but her face turned bright after hearing the gospel. She decided to trust God with her children, and she began to share the gospel with others as well. I also shared the gospel with another coworker who was also disabled like me due to polio. Although she had many great ideas and presentation skills, she always had to ask someone else to do presentations because she did not want to show herself limping in front of others. Even when she was receiving an award, she felt uncomfortable walking up to the podium. However, after hearing the gospel, she became bold and was able to share her testimony in front of 1,500 people. Also, another coworker overcame her stomach cancer through the gospel, and amazingly, her parents also came to believe in Jesus. As a result, a small church group was started along with a Christian fellowship group. In this way, 3 of us became one body through the gospel, and we were joyful and took care of each other like family. Other coworkers asked me why I was so happy. Then they heard the gospel and became believers of Jesus. Those coworkers also shared it with others, and they formed a small church group as well. The place I work has many branch offices nationwide. Ever since I began to share the gospel and formed a small church group, I began to have a new hope. It was like this. Dandelions spread their seeds when the wind blows, and the seeds become dandelions too. In the same way, since the gospel has power, the co-workers who heard the gospel will continue to spread the gospel all over the country. I came to dream of churches being raised up. Even now, the gospel is continuously being spread through the small churches. One of my co-workers was reassigned to Jincheon. She shared the gospel at our new location and had worship services like she did at the Christian fellowship meetings in Seoul. I also became a dandelion seed and was reassigned to Gangneung. I am still sharing the gospel there. While sharing the gospel at work, this happened to me once. The employees brought me various documents that required review, but they were prepared incorrectly. I used to get mad and yell at them, but one day, a thought came to me. Younghae, you must share the gospel with your lips. How will you share the gospel if you're going to be angry and raise your voice like that? So I thought, if I'm going to help them, I will do it kindly. So I resolved to treat them better. They now call me Sweet Younghae at work. After meeting Jesus, I always had a hope that I would be able to boast about Jesus in the auditorium at work. The reason was that we often had famous people come and give speeches in the auditorium. Their speeches were usually filled with wisdom and challenges. However, they could not provide true solutions for the problems of life. However, I had assurance that the gospel was the answer to all problems, and I wished that I would get a chance to speak in front of everyone to give the gospel. And finally, that opportunity came to me. Through an end-of-the-year event at work, I was nominated and voted by my peers to receive an award for the best smile. Not only the people in the auditorium, but the employees from all over the country watched me through a live video feed. I had a chance to speak about the reason why I was so happy. I said that the reason why I was so happy was because Jesus, who is the source of joy, was with me, and I was joyful and thankful for everything all the time. Later, I heard that the director said that he'd felt like he was at a church revival. The gospel is such great news.
Amen.
For me, my disability was a path of blessing that led me to Jesus. Although I have a disability, Jesus loves me enough to give his life for me. I am so confident because he is with me.
Amen.
After meeting the risen Jesus, all of my problems were solved. I hope that all of you will enjoy an abundant life in Jesus like I do. Thank you.